course, Donald Fagen was also responsible for all the lead vocals on the album, as usual. Then he sang some harmonies with himself on Asia, Home at Last, and Josie. But in addition to Donald, there are 6 other vocalists credited on the album, 2 male and 4 female. The male singers are former band member Michael McDonald and Timothy B. Schmidt, who also joined the Eagles that same year. So 1977 was a big year for Timothy.
Yeah.
Joined the Eagles and sing on Asia. Ay caramba. And then, if you do look at that Making of Asia thing, you can hear some isolated samples of those women singing in harmony and doing the sort of a gospel feel. And this is what I mean. A lot of beautiful touches on this and a lot of attention to detail. And finally, you've got 10 horn players. Probably the most notable would be Wayne Shorter of Weather Report, also played with Miles Davis, who didn't really do sessions. He sort of had to be talked into it. But he agreed to play on the title track, Asia, with that distinctive sax playing over Steve Gadd's distinctive drumming, one of the nicer moments on there. Pete Christley from the Tonight Show Orchestra soloed on Deacon Blues, another standout. What a player he is. Tom Scott, he played on Black Cow, but more importantly, he wrote the horn arrangements for the entire album.
Yeah.
And I know you have a lot of skill in that area yourself because you write charts for Brass Transit and for Monkey House. So what's your impression of Tom Scott's work on Asia? Above and beyond simply being very tasteful, were there any innovations happening in there as well?
Well, he was certainly using sounds that weren't being heard much, certainly not in the pop realm in the late 70s. From talking to Fagen about it, I know that they would give him kind of stylistic directives. In fact, they specifically cited the Oliver Nelson Blues in the Abstract Truth record as a way to go for horn voicings, which to me means nothing too high and probably stacked up in fourths wherever you can. Interestingly, Fagen said that Tom Scott was so busy in those days, a lot of times they'd be getting set up for the Steely Dan horn date, and Tom Scott would be out there on the studio floor with his pencil, running around to different guys' music stands, literally finishing the arrangement at the 59th minute of the 11th hour.
Right.
But it always got done.
Which just goes to show how talented he was. That he knew he could pull it off at the last second. And that you said in the book, Donald Fagen said he often did it last minute, but he always delivered.
I love that story because it's a little insight into when someone gets to the level as an arranger and player of a Tom Scott, it's all in the tank, and they have the confidence that even if they're kind of tying it all up on the day of the session, it's going to be note perfect, and it's going to be understated and exactly the style that the band is looking for. The other horn story that I loved was on the Wayne Shorter solo. Everybody thinks of those jazz titans, when you're sort of one of the top, say, 3 to 5 people who've played the instrument in the jazz idiom. People almost think that you're magic, or you got struck by lightning and you have some kind of God-given instinctive way of doing what you do. But the way Wayne Shorter functioned on that Steely Dan session gives a lie to that idea, like that sort of noble savage thing that you hear in a lot of jazz criticism. Like, nobody is more studied than someone who's killing it on their instrument playing jazz. There's just no way around that. So Wayne Shorter went out there on the floor, and he's got this roadmap with a couple of spots to solo on with some pretty tricky chord changes. And, he didn't just burn through it the first time and put his overcoat back on and leave. He got down there in the trenches and very quickly, I assume, realized that he wasn't being handed a chart that you would expect to receive on a pop session.
Yeah.
He was at the absolute peak of Weather Report at the time, so Joe Zawinul was plopping stuff down in front of him all the time that would, blow anyone's mind. But Fagen said that Shorter requested kind of a break and went over to the piano and played through some things and wrote out some scales that he was going to use on specific chords, and kind of did the homework the way a mere mortal would do, and then came back, and the next number of takes were all great and on point and usable. So I love the fact that geniuses have to do their homework too.
You didn't speak with Tom Scott or Wayne Shorter, but you did get to talk to Chuck Finley, horn player. What did he say about playing on Aja?
Well, the dominant thing I get from talking to Chuck about his Steely Dan experiences is just pride. I mean, he was so proud to have been on these records, and things being what they were in the LA scene at that point, a lot of trumpet players were just going from room to room playing at the absolute top register of their instrument all the time and playing this kind of 16th note-y stuff. It's sort of that style that was perfected by Jerry Hay and Gary Grant and that horn section, and usually with Jerry Hay writing the charts. But I think that Finley found it was nice to be asked to play in just sort of the middle register of the horn and be part of the texture instead of playing stabby, kind of intrusive lead lines in between vocal phrases and stuff. It's just a whole other school of horn arranging. I'm a big Jerry Hay fan.
Yeah. But
it's like for Steely Dan, the horn section was more like a chordal instrument, a coloring instrument, rather than sort of a James Brownie part of the percussion, the way it is, let's say, in Tower of Power or something like that.
And I know that when Donald worked on Kamakiriad, a lot of the guys who played horns on that commented that when the record came out, they go, "Oh my God, you can hear us."
Right. Yeah. Well, that's the thing. There was nothing in those mixes on any of their records where it wasn't fully meant to be. And they were great at throwing out stuff that didn't need to be in mixes, which is why even when there are 35 musicians on the record, you listen to the mixes and there's this wonderful sense of space to it all. And that was Rick Murata's comment on Peg too. He said, I had done that little hi-hat, half opening the hi-hat skip thing on a whole bunch of tracks, but the first time I actually heard it on a record was Peg. He was so pleased that they cared about that nuance showing up in a final mix.
One of the things about hiring studio players is don't hide them behind the mixes and stuff. And this is obviously what they did with Steve Gadd, Wayne Shorter, Rick Murata, with everybody, Jay. Everybody was spotlighted and showcased because that's the whole point of having the best people. And speaking of the best people, would it be fair to say that Walter and Donald's compositions not only deserved to have the top players working on them, but in fact they actually kind of needed to have the top players play them to pull them off adequately?
Yeah, I would argue it's more the latter. You can't. It's hard to argue points of taste. This collection of songs to me is probably in the top 5 albums in the, let's say, the rock era. But whether or not you agree with me on that, you'd have to admit that you weren't going to get kind of stock pop and rock guys delivering these tracks the way they needed to be delivered. The list of ingredients on a Steely Dan song was not the same as a list of ingredients on an Eagles song or a Fleetwood Mac song, or think of other stuff that's contemporary with them. Though all that music's great, but you need jazz facility and a real tolerance for complexity while still having this kind of elemental sense of groove and making the whole thing sound like it's meant to be and isn't a bunch of shots and specifics that are rolling by and being decoded by a bunch of pros. Dean Parks, I think it's on the Aja Classic Album special, talks about how a lot of bands will bust your ass going for perfection, whereas Steely Dan would get to the point where it was perfection and everybody knew it and could do it perfectly, mathematically, take in and take out, and then go past that because they wanted it to sound like it was in their bones, and that it was intuitive and organic and wasn't just sort of mathematically correct.
Yeah, I think the word he used was he wanted it to sound natural as opposed to perfect.
Right. Yeah, that's a great distinction, because there's a world of difference between those two things. Like if all your, that kind of quest for perfection got out of hand in the 80s once the MIDI protocol was in everybody's bedroom,
Yeah.
and anybody could sort of quantize something to a hilarious degree. But the stuff that makes a Steely Dan track compelling, it's not that. It's not perfection. It's these little nuances that happen. The snare hitting just like a nanosecond later than you think it will, or a rhythm guitar track that's over a straight groove but has just a tiny hint of swing.
Mm-hmm.
Those sort of non-quantizable things are the stock and trade of a Steely Dan record, and they were in the fortunate position by Aja of not worrying about whether it took 2 days to get to that point, or 3 different bands, or 2 different cities. They could just wait until they liked it. And I think that Becker and Fagen would admit that they're meticulous in the songwriting realm, and then they're flexible during the sessions.
Mm-hmm.
Although they're certainly looking for something that they think is really exceptional. But then when they get to the mix stage, it can be very, very painstaking. They took 5 months on mixes alone for Aja, which for 7 tracks, with the kind of studio budgets that existed back then, that's that's asking a lot of your record label for them to keep paying studio bills while you spend, let's say, 20 days per track mixing.
Yeah, I was going to make the point later in my outline, but I'll make it now. I mean, on a certain level, the record label is kind of one of the heroes of Aja for indulging these guys and, valuing the art of what they were doing over their own profits. I'm sure they didn't necessarily do it enthusiastically, but they did do it, and they need to get credit for that.
They did do it, and it's specifically interesting to me that the previous album didn't have any hits on it. So you're coming off a record a year before The Royal Scam, which, most Steely Dan heads agreed at the time was the best thing they'd ever done. But, nothing was on the chart, and the album went gold, and they were dependably sort of in that category where they would sell, 500,000 records anyway in the US and kind of pay for themselves. But there was, the budget on Aja has got to be probably on the way to 10 times what the budget on The Royal Scam was. And the record label just, by that point believed in them enough. They thought these guys are going to cook something up that's really world class and moves the ball up the field and pleases their fans. And maybe if we're lucky, there'll be a single on it. As it turned out, there were 3. Yeah. So they did okay.
That's why I also have to wonder about Gary Katz. So I mentioned earlier, he's kind of like the conduit between the band and the label, and how much he did behind the scenes to sort of like keep that in check. Personally, I think 5 months to mix anything is outrageous. But on the other hand, you can't argue with the results. Well, just to make sure this doesn't turn into a complete fawning fanboy Steely Dan love fest.
Too late.
I know, an hour in. I'm going to go ahead and get controversial here, because I'm going to confess that of the 7 tracks on the album, I consider 6 of them to be, unmitigated, epic, classic masterpieces. One of the tracks I don't care for at all. And I personally think it sticks out like a sore thumb in terms of, being of lesser quality than the others. And I'm going to assume that in retrospect, on a certain level, even Walter and Donald might agree, because if you go back to that Making of Aja classic albums thing, they went into great loving detail about 6 of the tracks, and one of them they just didn't talk about at all. So I think you know the one I'm talking about.
Do I, though? I'm actually scratching my head. We're not Skyping with the cameras on here, but
okay. Then clearly you have a higher opinion of this track than I do. I find this groove dun 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 dun. I find that rather bland and uninspired in contrast with the other 3 grooves surrounding it. Think of the groove for Peg. think of, the hi-hat tilt groove, the Home at Last, the Pretty Shuffle, Josie, the funkiest thing on the album. Then side 2, track 3, dun, 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 dun. I Got the News.
Yep. Yeah. Well, I mean, I think if you took a poll, that's probably people's least favorite song on the album.
Yeah.
I like it. To me, it's a groove cousin of Peg.
Mm-hmm.
It's sort of in the same general ballpark of funkiness and tempo. I like the way it has a strange structure, that song. First of all, I don't mind that vamp that you're describing. I could listen to that all day long, especially with Feldman, doing his odd decorations on the piano over top of it. But I like the fact that you go into these chunks of that song where the harmony's really thick and fast moving, and there'll be a vocal phrase, and then they just come back to the vamp. And then the next time they hit, maybe it goes somewhere for 2 bars and then comes back to that vamp. And then there's what feels like half a bridge, and then it comes back. It's like just one long tension and release thing. And certainly I do find it a real uplifting moment when they get to the Broadway Duchess, the bridge section. I don't even, whether that's the B or the C or the D section, I forget now, but with the Michael McDonald lead vocal and all that. I mean, for me, you'd be really missing something if you took that out of the 7 tracks.
I think there are a lot of people who probably agree with you. Personally, I think it's a bit of a disaster because I think that there were some stronger tracks they had in the can, but clearly it has redeeming qualities. I mean, it's Steely Dan with all the best players. I'm just saying in comparison to everything else on the album, I feel it's a weak moment. But another factor in all this is that I'm going to give our listeners a little taste of what might have been, because I have a demo of an earlier version of the song that has some of the same lyrical content, but a completely different groove that really swings, particularly in comparison to what the track later became. This has more of a pretzel logic feel to it. But let's check it out. Here is a full band demo of an alternate version of I Got the News.
I know, man. All right, this is horrible. All right, here we go. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4. Carrie's on the phone with the lizard and she tells him that she's looking to move. Daddy is around, millionaire, but they're nervous and they can't find a groove. My brain's on the floor, I know it
comments?
Oh, that's really great. And I haven't heard that before, so thank you for blowing my mind. Just when the little drum vamp was going by itself there at the end, I thought we were going to go into Steve Miller Band Swingtown. But anyway, I agree with you about the Pretzel Logic thing. It sounds like the building blocks of that song are sort of the same kind of chords and, blues-based stuff that they were using in the earlier part of their career. There's certainly some cool melodic stuff in there, and they do go to the relative minor for the bridge, as they did in the eventual final version. Let me see what else. Well, definitely the bass was sharp to the piano.
Yeah, you could tell it was a demo. You could tell it was a run through.
Yeah.
And there was a sort of looseness to the guitar solo. They knew it wasn't a keeper or anything. But I like it because You and Your Lark and Daddy Was a Rare Millionaire. That stuff is in there. But clearly, it's a more primitive kind of thing than the sort of tight, slick thing that happened later. So, but you see how that had a much airier feel to it, and more of a Parker's Band, I guess.
Parker's Band, for sure. It's got that kind of pentatonic melody like Parker's Band, and the groove actually reminds me of, I don't know if you know their song Wet Side Story.
Yeah.
That they were doing live in the 90s. It never made it on a record, but it's kind of in that bag, and it's almost a little Cousin Dupree, I would have to say, too. To my point about Fagen's keyboard playing earlier, if you listen to the chord voicings in that piano-only demo that you played at the top, I mean, those are the voicings on the record with very few exceptions. The lead notes, the spacing, like he really had the harmonic concept for that song down. So somebody like Feldman or Joe Sample or whatever, sort of listening to Fagen, what Fagen did, maybe tidying it up a little, but basically it's all there.
Yeah, they didn't really need much room for improvement because, as Donald Fagen has said, a lot of Steely Dan's music is chord driven. The whole point of it is the motion from chord to chord, and the melodies sort of work within the chords and everything. I'm sure they were thrilled to be given things with 13th chords and minor nines and minor 11s and stuff to play. They said, wow, I can sink my teeth into this. They played with a certain feel that Donald probably could have gotten as well, as we said. But it could be he does the old thing where there's certain old film directors, when they got the actors on the set, before they gave them any direction, they would wait and see what the actors would do. And if they liked something the actors did better than what they envisioned in the script or in their mind, they would just subtly just let that be it, So it's possible somebody sat down and just did a couple things, and Donald goes, oh, good. I'm glad he played the Rhodes on that, because I wouldn't have thought of that little moment there.
I'm sure there are many moments like that. I mean, the reason you have people outside of your inner circle in the room is you think they can bring something to it that you couldn't. So you already know what the demo sounds like. You would like it to sound better than that when it's done. So you get the A-list guys in.
Well, after the success of Asia, the label put out a greatest hits collection that contained one previously unreleased track called Here at the Western World, which dated back to the Royal Scam sessions. So there is a precedent for them producing a completed track and then holding it back from release. I mean, that could be one reason their albums take so long. You said they're trying different drummers and different players and entire, songs. Apparently, the Gaucho track Third World Man dates back to the Asia sessions. Apparently, it was called Were You Blind That Day?
Yes.
Before it was called Third World Man. A number of other Gaucho outtakes later surfaced as bootlegs, including the infamous The Second Arrangement, a finished track that was, definitely deemed worthy for inclusion on the album, but unfortunately, an assistant engineer was instructed to cue it up for playback and accidentally erased 75% of it.
Yeah, what I heard was, and there are variations on this story, who knows what the real thing is that an engineer was told to bulk erase a 2-inch reel, a 24-track reel, and put the wrong one on the machine.
Eesh.
Like, just the horror of that. I mean, I can't believe, I don't know whatever happened to that guy, but if he remained in the recording industry, he must have screaming nightmares about that, putting that machine in record to this day.
Another reason I bring all this up is that I have something else here I want to share, which is a completed track that dates back to the Asia sessions. And where the other one we heard has the Pretzel Logic vibe, I think this one definitely has more of a Royal Scam vibe, both musically and lyrically. Are you familiar with The Bear?
I am.
I'm assuming that the majority of the listeners are not familiar with this, so this will be a treat for them. And this is a little better produced than that demo we heard. So from the 1977 Asia sessions, here is an unused track called The Bear.
There's a bear that walks like a man. Better shake him fast. Better hide yourself if you can, 'cause he wants your ass. I believe you'll do quite well, but only time will tell. If you got the bear or the bear got you.
Pretty funky.
That's great. Nice, relentless groove. I wonder who's playing drums.
I'm pretty sure Chuck Rainey's playing bass because it's like he was a permanent fixture there. Yeah, I wonder about those kind of things myself. And there again, as a standalone thing, it's pretty awesome. But where would it fit on the album? That's the thing you have to consider.
Yeah, I mean, they were very into the pacing thing, and as you pointed out, they were actually into putting songs together based on, does the key of the last song go nicely into the key of the next song? And there was a big kind of jigsaw puzzle from their point of view. I mean, I love that track. Period. I can certainly imagine it getting all the way to the finish line with some more guitar and probably some horns, and that sounds like probably a finished bed track with a good up to snuff Fagen scratch vocal on it, but didn't get far beyond that. I love the little Rhodes intro, which is the same as the instrumental bridge there, same material, and it really sounds interestingly like, if you ever wondered if their influences went back further than Duke Ellington or sort of early 20th century jazz, that sounds like Ravel or something. It sounds like French classical impressionist type music.
Yeah, definitely atypical. And there again, since they were kind of going for the jazz rock thing, maybe they thought. But would you agree with me that it has more of a Royal Scam kind? And a couple of the changes and a couple of them, the moments, his lyrical attitude, I expected him to go into, like the title track from Royal Scam or something.
Yeah, there's shades of that track of the Royal Scam, and I also hear a little Caves of Altamira maybe in there too.
Definitely. But yeah, so I wanted to share some rarities. I don't think there's really any point in playing the actual Aja tracks for everybody because, I mean, come on. If you're listening to this and you've never heard Aja, push pause and go listen to Aja.
Go listen to Aja 600 times.
Yeah. Then you'll be like less than halfway to where Don and I are.
Right.